special hearing of the Florida Historical Society is called to order. Executive Director Ben Brookmarkle presiding. At this time, please silence your cell phone.
Please be seated. In 2013, we are commemorating the 500th anniversary of the naming of our state by Juan Ponce de Leon. This special hearing of the Florida Historical Society has been called in an attempt to determine where exactly Ponce landed when he named our state La Florida on April 2nd, 1513. To accomplish this goal, advocates of 4 possible landing sites of Ponce de Leon will each present their arguments. We'll hear arguments in support of the St. Augustine area as the most likely landing site, as well as Ponce Inlet, Melbourne Beach, and Jupiter Island. Following the presentations of the 4 advocates, we will hear testimony from 3 very special witnesses who will provide additional information for the jury to consider. Before we proceed, I'd like each jury member to introduce yourself and your affiliation. We'll begin with the foreman of the jury.
I'm Dr. Jose Bernardo Fernandez. I am Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Central Florida and a former president of the Florida Historical Society.
Good afternoon. I'm John Whitney Payson, representing the town of Jupiter Island and the Jupiter Island Historical Society. Thank you.
I'm Alice Howell, member of the Ormond Beach Historical Society.
I'm Ron Howell, board member, Ormond Beach Historical Society.
Pat Northey, Volusia County Council member, District 5, and I chaired the Historic Courthouse Renovation Committee.
Brian Feigenbaum, County Court Judge, Volusia County.
The Florida Historical Society thanks each member of the jury for their participation today. I'd also like to recognize our distinguished panel of advocates and ask each of you to please introduce yourself to the members of the public assembled here and to those watching live in Tallahassee and around the world on the internet. Let's begin with the advocate for St. Augustine as the most likely landing site of Ponce de Leon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Luis Bustamante. I am the Chief Assistant State Attorney here in the 7th Judicial Circuit, which encompasses Volusia County. I am going to be advocating for St. Augustine being the first landing site of Juan Ponce de Leon back in 1513. Thank you.
Dr. Brookmarkle, members of the jury, audience here assembled today. Good afternoon. My name is Judge Bell Schuman. I'm a county court judge here in Volusia County. This is our proud home. I am going to demonstrate here today that the inlet, just 20 miles to our east on the ocean, that bears the name of the explorer, Juan Ponce de Leon, is the most likely landing site when the explorer landed in 1513 and named our state La Florida. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm just Dawn P. Fields. I'm the county court judge in Volusia County. I will prove, not demonstrate, I will prove today beyond all reasonable doubt that Melbourne Beach is where Ponce de Leon landed in Florida. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Philippe Jeck, managing partner of the law firm of Jeck, Harris, Rayner & Jones in Juno Beach, just a little bit south of the Jupiter Inlet. Now, I'm willing to concede that Jupiter Island may not have been the first place that Juan Ponce de Leon landed in 1513. But what the evidence will absolutely prove, and the testimony and the historical record will show convincingly, that Jupiter Island was the most important stop of that first voyage. Thank you.
Again, on behalf of the Florida Historical Society, I thank each of our advocates for participating in this special hearing. For centuries, scholars, historians, students, and others have been arguing about where exactly Ponce de Leon landed on Florida's east coast in 1513 when he gave our state its name. We know that Juan Ponce de Leon was born in Spain in 1474 to a noble family where he became an experienced soldier. He joined Christopher Columbus on his expedition to the New World in 1493. In 1504, Ponce led the conquest of the native population of Hispaniola and was named governor. A few years later, Ponce was named governor of the neighboring island of Puerto Rico. It was from there that Ponce set sail for Florida. King Ferdinand II signed a contract with Ponce in 1512, granting him permission to search for the islands of Benami. The contract included instructions for how Ponce was to distribute any gold and slaves that he acquired, and declared that he would be governor for life of any lands he discovered. Ponce assembled a crew of 200 people that included women and free people of African descent. His fleet of 3 ships included the Santiago, the San Cristobal, and the Santa Maria. The ships reached the northern end of the Bahamas on March 27, 1513, which was Easter Sunday. They sailed for another few days until they sighted land on April 2nd. Because it was the Easter season, which the Spanish called the Festival of Flowers, and because of the beautiful landscape, Ponce named the land he saw La Florida, Land of Flowers. The next day, on April 3rd, 1513, Ponce came ashore to claim this land for Spain. But where was he? Where exactly did he come ashore? That's the question we're exploring today. Mr. Bustamante, please present your case.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I please support? Members of the jury, the public. The earliest, best, and most complete record of Juan Ponce de Leon's landing in Florida in 1513 was written by historians. His name is Antonio de Herrera y Tordesillas, and he did that in 1601. Mind you that when he wrote this particular chronicle, it was 90 years, roughly, after Ponce de Leon 1513 voyage, but it was based upon the original documents from that voyage. This makes Herrera's detailed chronicle the best evidence that we have today about Juan Ponce de Leon's landing in Florida back in April 3rd of 1513. And I'm going to read a quote, and this is from the medieval Spanish. When Herrera writes, let me put my glasses on the 2nd of April, when the water was growing sharp, the ships came into 9 fathoms, a league from the land, which is latitude 30 degrees and 8 minutes. Everybody pay attention to this, latitude 30 degrees and 8 minutes. They ran along the coast seeking harbor, and at night anchored near shore in 8 fathoms of water. Believing the land to be an island, they named it La Florida, because they discovered during the season, which the Spanish called Pascua Florida, and also because it appeared to be very delightful, having many fresh groves, and it was all level. Ponce de Leon went on shore, took possession of the land. This is from the 1601 text. Latitude 30 and 8 degrees. When you look at the map, it places it somewhere around here. Remember, these latitudes are from those original texts, from the original documents from his voyage. That places it just north of modern-day St. Augustine. Now, even the Spanish explorers back then understood that they made minor mistakes in their nautical calculations, which at later times they try to correct. When the noted historian Edward W. Lawson, who's a Florida historian, in 1946 understood these mistakes, and he wrote, I'm quoting again, "The dead reckoning based on courses, dates, speeds given by Herrera with proper allowances made for drift, leeway caused by known currents and improbable winds, places him at north latitude 29 degrees, 49 minutes, at a point 3.43 miles, nautical miles, off the shore of Anastasia Island and 5 nautical miles south of the St. Augustine Inlet. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why St. Augustine has been known for centuries as the first landing site of Ponce de Leon in 1513. Additionally, legend and folklore holds that Juan Ponce de Leon was looking for the fountain of youth. He take one sip of that water and can make an old man feel young again. One of the things that I said last time when I argued this case successfully, I made out that I told him I was 85 years old. Actually, I am 90 years old. Since 1902, in St. Augustine, visitors have come to the Fountain of Youth to partake in the
Objection, Dr. Brotmarkle. Modern Florida historians such as Dave Michael Francis have demonstrated that this legendary story about Ponce de Leon searching for the Fountain of Youth is just a myth. The first person to link Ponce and the Fountain of Youth was Spanish historian González Fernández y Valdés, who was writing 1535, more than 20 years after the 1513 voyage, and more than a decade after Ponce's death. Ponce's contract with King Ferdinand II mentions gold and slaves and land, but said nothing about the Fountain of Youth. Historians that came after Oviedo just kept repeating the myth, and now most people believe the existence of the modern-day Fountain of Youth. The existence of the modern-day theme park based on a myth just does not prove that Ponce Inlet is the original site of his landing.
Objection sustained.
I still look good for 90, don't I? In conclusion, St. Augustine is the oldest city that in what later has become the United States of America. St. Augustine was established in 1565 by Don Pedro Menéndez de Aviles. When Jamestown was established, or when the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock, the original settlers of St. Augustine already had great-grandchildren. St. Augustine, and I'm going to say this adjective a lot first. St. Augustine is the site of the first school, the first fort, the first church, and the first hospital here in the United States of America. And also, based on all the evidence that we have the earliest text from 1601 from Mr. Herrera, and we also have the learned treatise from Edward Dr. Lawson, which established that, indeed, St. Augustine is the first landing site of Juan Ponce de Leon on April 3rd, 1513. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bustamante. We'll now hear from the advocate for Ponce Inlet, Judge Bell Schuman.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here today. We may disagree on exactly where Ponce de Leon made landfall, but one thing that we all do agree on is that there should be 3 official accounts of Juan Ponce de Leon's first trip to Florida in 1513, written by people who were actually there. Under his contract, Ponce was required to make a detailed report of his journey. Second, an inspector was employed by the Spanish government to accompany Ponce and document how he was complying with this agreement. We also know that Ponce's chief pilot, Anton de Alaminos, kept a daily record of the expedition. Unfortunately, none of these records can be located today. My learned colleague, Bustamante, is correct when he says that Herrera's description of Ponce de Leon's voyage in 1513 is the earliest existing account that we have, although he admits that it was written at least 88 years later. It is believed that Herrera may have borrowed some of these official documents and failed to return them once he was finished with them. Although Herrera's account of Ponce's 1513 voyage in Florida is the best that we have, we all agree that it is not always accurate. For example, Herrera repeats the myth perpetuated here today and by several of his predecessors that Ponce was looking for the Fountain of Youth. We now know that to be a myth. While Herrera dutifully reported that Ponce and his entourage first landed at latitude 30 degrees 8 minutes, he did not take into account the navigational errors of Chief Pilot Anton de Alaminos. Also, as Mr. Bustamante pointed out, in 1946, Florida historian Edward Lawson demonstrated how the latitude recorded by Alaminos and reported to Herrera must be adjusted to identify accurately the first landing site of Ponce de Leon. That is correct. However, Mr. Lawson and Mr. Bustamante failed to compensate enough for the navigational errors of Anton de Alaminos. In his comprehensive 1974 study, European Discovery of America, The Southern Voyages, 1492 to 1616, historian Samuel Eliot Morison writes, and I quote, "If you deduct 1 degree, the same mistake that Alaminos made at San Salvador, from 30 degrees 8 minutes, you almost get the latitude of 29 degrees and 5 minutes, that of a little inlet near Daytona Beach, my home, 50 miles south of St. Augustine, which has been named for Ponce de Leon." Additionally, Morrison writes that I find no evidence in Herrera or elsewhere that Ponce tried to sail north of his Florida landfall or that he ever visited the site of St. Augustine. More recently, preeminent Florida archaeologist Gerald Milanovich, in a scholarly paper soon to be published, finds a consensus of opinion that adjusts this navigational error by another half a degree south for a total of about 90 miles. Milanich reminds us also that shell middens were the tallest features along the coast, visible for many miles from sea, and were used by colonial navigators. One of the largest is Turtle Mound, located in the present-day Canaveral National Seashore, just south of Ponce Inlet. Milanich also notes that when Ponce and his men came ashore that fateful day to take on water and firewood and skirmish with the indigenous people, he left a stone cross at the site, and he also named the location La Cruz, Spanish for the cross. As we all know, the Halifax and Indian rivers at Ponce Inlet form the shape of a cross. Further evidence that that is where Ponce de Leon and his men first made landfall in La Florida. So, taking into account the documented error of at least 1 degree latitude that Alaminos recorded as Ponce de Leon's fleet sailed past San Salvador, and the name that he gave it, the Cross, the most likely landing site for the expedition is right here, at a little inlet just south of Daytona Beach, Ponce Inlet. And after all, the very name of the town indicates the historic presence of Ponce de Leon.
Objection, Your Honor. Until 1927, Ponce Inlet actually was not named Ponce Inlet, it was named Mosquito Inlet. I know that because I was a young boy back then, and that's what they used to name it. Now, they changed the name later on in order to improve not only tourism, but also real estate development. But it was not because it was named after the man who landed there.
Objection sustained.
Well, regardless, Ponce de Leon Inlet, properly known as Ponce Inlet, has a long and distinguished history. The Ponce de Leon Inlet Light Station, completed in 1887, is the tallest lighthouse in Florida and the second tallest lighthouse in America. By using both the earliest and most complete records available and the informed scholarship of contemporary historians, we must conclude, after careful consideration, that the first landing site of Juan Ponce de Leon in 1513 was 20 miles due east at Ponce Inlet, Florida. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Schuman. The argument supporting Melbourne Beach as the most likely landing site of Ponce de Leon will be presented by Judge Dawn Fields.
May it please the court, members of the jury, distinguished guests, and poor misguided counsel. I'm so sorry. The landing site of Juan Ponce de Leon in 1513 was indeed Melbourne Beach. In October 1992 edition of the academic journal, the Florida Historical Quarterly, Douglas T. Peck published an article called Reconstruction and Analysis of the 1513 Voyage of Juan Ponce de Leon. In this article, Colonel Peck references all the sources that have been presented before and for consideration by my colleagues. The histories of Antonio de Herrera and Edward Lawson and Samuel Eliot Morrison. Using all these other available resources, Douglas Peck proves, beyond to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt, that the first landing site of Juan Ponce de Leon was Melbourne Beach. Colonel Peck concludes, like other Spanish pilots of this time, Anton de Alaminos navigated by what we call dead reckoning. That means calculating compass directions and distances from a known departure point. Now, both of my fellow advocates who have presented their positions acknowledge that we must make corrections for their flaws in early 16th century navigational records as we try to determine the actual first landing site of Juan Ponce de Leon. What has not been considered, however, yet, but is taken into account by Douglas T. Peck, is the magnetic variation of the compasses used by early Spanish explorers in the New World. Peck cites James E. Kelly's Jr. conclusion that the compasses used by Alaminos and his contemporaries were manufactured in Seville, Spain. In order to show true north in Seville, the compasses were built with a correction that makes the north arrow point to the left 5.65 degrees from magnetic north. This caused navigational errors when those compasses were used in the New World. When Peck reconstructed Ponce's 1513 voyage on his own sailboat, he not only used all of the navigational information available, he also applied that 5.6 degree correction from the Seville compass to his navigational computations. This navigational approach, combined with Colonel Peck's retracing Ponce's actual voyage as closely as possible from the available descriptions brought to him to the east of Central Florida, Peck writes, and I quote, "From my reconstructed track, I found that Ponce de Leon's anchorage and landing after discovering Florida and the North American continent were about 28 degrees north latitude and 80 degrees 29 minutes longitude, which is below Cape Canaveral and a short distance south of Melbourne Beach. I do not say this is the exact spot, but I place the accuracy within 5 to 8 nautical miles either side of this fix. An historical marker erected by the state of Florida cites Douglas Peck's research and identifies Melbourne Beach as the site where Ponce de Leon first landed."
Dr. Marco, I must object. The historic marker in question identifies Melbourne Beach as the possible vicinity of maybe where Ponce de Leon landed. The first line of the sign reads, quote, "While there is disagreement among scholars," I'm sure a fact we can all agree on here today, "it is believed that this site may be in an area where Juan Ponce de Leon made landfall in April 1513. There are so many qualifiers with this statement that the sign alone erected by Melbourne Beach hardly serves as proof that is the location where Ponce first made landfall in La Florida."
Point taken. Objection sustained.
Poor Judge Schuman. Anyway, in conclusion, by physically testing this theories about Spanish colonial navigation and its flaws throughout his recreation of the 1413 voyage, Douglas T. Peck definitely proves that the first landing site of Ponce de Leon in Florida, members of the jury, was at or near present-day Melbourne Beach. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Fields. Mr. Jeck is next, serving as the advocate for Jupiter Island.
There is no doubt that April 2nd, 1513, the day when Ponce de Leon first gave our state his name, is an important historical date. Although I have my own personal theory that when he saw the land for the first time, he didn't say La Florida, he said, "Look, Deland, Deland." But anyway, on the next day, when he came ashore, it's very noteworthy also. But we have to think about what was really important about his trip. What was important besides giving our state its name? There are several important historical ramifications of that first trip. Now, where he came ashore, that's a historical curiosity that I'll allow my colleagues to quibble about. But what we have to know about that trip is that he was the first European to encounter Native Americans. And he was the first European to discover the all-powerful Gulf Stream. And both of those events, they occurred right at the southern tip of Jupiter Island at the Jupiter Inlet. Now, in the weeks after Ponce's first landing, he traveled south. Herrera describes Ponce's voyage with 3 ships coming south along the coastline here. Those ships encountered the Gulf Stream and then were pushed back up north to Jupiter Island. Now, the historian Douglas Peck says that this action could only have taken place at a bulge or cape of the coast just north of the Lake Worth Inlet, a little further south than the Jupiter Inlet. Peck also says, quote, Ponce de Leon managed to anchor his ship and one other, but the third ship was caught offshore in water too deep to anchor and was carried away out of sight. The third ship was the smallest of the vessels, and it was called a Brigantina. So, Ponce's fleet, after coming south, encountering the Gulf Stream, was pushed back up north to Jupiter Inlet, where Herrera says, when Ponce first came down, he noticed there were some thatched huts, some boyos. And so it was there that Ponce was able to anchor 2 of his ships to wait for the third to return. He went ashore on Jupiter Island, and Edward Lawson describes what happened this way. Quote, the Indians, seeing the 2 vessels anchored close inshore, where the strength of the current would cause them to strain at their cables, would come out from the beach running and call to the explorers. Juan Ponce de Leon would then go ashore. He and his company would be the first Europeans to make contact with the savage tribe of Ais. The actions of these Indians in at once trying to take the boat in arms is not characteristics of the more civilized Muckwans who lived further north. Samuel T. Eliot Morris describes the scene of the first contact a different way. At a place where he saw the native boyos, Ponce went ashore in his longboat, which an Indian welcoming committee tried to seize. Ponce scuffled with them. He reserved his firepower until one Christian had been stunned to the head, and then he let go. But he did little damage and little suffering was caused to the natives. On the next day, he sailed to a river where they took on wood and water, waiting for the errant Brigantina. That's the first mention of water. That's where the mythical fountain of youth would have been found. In fact, Mr. Payson from the jurors, you heard him introduce himself. He's well over 150 years old. This river they named Santa Cruz, and Oreotillo identifies it as Jupiter Inlet at latitude 26 degrees 57 minutes, right exactly at the tip of this island. Douglas T. Peck also identifies the river where Ponce took on water and firewood as Jupiter Inlet. At the south end of Jupiter Island, Peck writes, quote, "He named the river La Cruz, and he left a stone cross with an inscription. After the third ship returned, Ponce left the cross at Jupiter Inlet, and his fleet continued south until they approached the Cape, and he named that cape the Cabo de Corrientes, or Cape of Currents." Morrison, yet another historian, asserts that Ponce's discovery of the Gulf Stream, quote, "rivals in importance the discovery of Florida. In fact, Florida was originally valued as a base from which to protect valuable cargoes shooting north through the Straits of Florida with this mighty booster." Lawson further elaborates, saying, quote, "Discovery of the Gulf Stream at this point and later experiences with it on the voyages led to the ultimate colonization of Florida, the establishment of the oldest continuing European settlement on the Atlantic coast of North America at St. Augustine." So, in conclusion, we have the first European contact with Native Americans and the discovery of the powerful superhighway ocean current called the Gulf Stream, both happening at Jupiter Island. And those events led to the further colonization of the entire coast, the increase in trade, the exploration, and the carrying of all the merchant ships laden with gold. That's why Jupiter Island must be remembered as the most important stop on Ponce de Leon's first voyage to our state. Thank you.
You make some fascinating points, Mr. Jack, and you're certainly correct about the importance of the first contact between Florida's indigenous people and Europeans, and about the significance of the discovery of the Gulf Stream. However, the primary purpose of our hearing today is to try to determine where exactly Ponce de Leon first landed when he named our state in 1513. Do you have any evidence to help us with that issue?
Well, no, but the people of South Florida, they want to know what was most important about that voyage. And I think what we've proven today is that what was most important occurred at Jupiter Island.
Thank you, Mr. Jack, and thanks again to each of the advocates who have given presentations here today. To further help our jury to reach a decision about where exactly Ponce de Leon first landed when he named our state in 1513, we will be calling 3 witnesses to offer testimony. So far today, we've been relying on primary source documents and various historians' interpretations of those records. Archaeology can also be a valuable tool when discussing Florida's Spanish colonial era, and the Florida Historical Society has a long history of supporting archaeology in the state. The Florida Historical Society has been preserving prehistory for more than a century. We were the first organization to collect Native American relics in Florida. We were the first to promote and publish archaeological research. We helped to create the position of Florida State Archaeologist. The Florida Anthropological Society began as a committee of the Florida Historical Society. At our statewide headquarters in Cocoa, we host the Florida Public Archaeology Network East Central Region. To help us here today, we called to the stand one of Florida's first archaeologists, Clarence B. Moore.
This hearing of the Florida Historical Society calls Clarence B. Moore to the stand.
Welcome, Mr. Moore. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Your Honor.
First, please explain to the court who you are and tell us anything that you can that might help us to reach a verdict today.
Certainly, Your Honor. It would be my pleasure. My name is Clarence Bloomfield Moore, but you can call me CB for short. I was born in Philadelphia in 1852, graduated from Harvard University in 1878, and then for 7 years I traveled the world, from Europe, Asia Minor, Egypt. I even crossed over the Andes at one point, went down the Amazon River, and it was during these travels that I gained a deep appreciation for ancient civilizations. It wasn't until 1878 that I had to come back to the United States, back to Philadelphia. My father had passed away, and I had to take over as president of the family business. So I started my work back at the Bishop and Moore Paper Company and worked there for 14 years. It was horrible. It wasn't where I wanted to be. I loved the adventure. I loved being outdoors. But it wasn't all bad. We made millions. It wasn't until I was 40 years old, in 1892, I was able to pursue my one and only passion, archaeology. And where else to start but right here in beautiful Florida. I spent 2 years traveling on my steamship, the Gopher, up and down the St. Johns River on the east coast of Florida. My methodology at that time was cutting edge. However, I must admit that sometimes I may have inadvertently destroyed some Native American sites. But it wasn't my fault. My records were meticulous. I photographed everything, drew illustrations for researchers for years to come. In fact, I even donated my written works to the Florida Historical Society Library for researchers to use even today. I must admit, however, that in all the time I spent in Florida doing archaeological work, I never came across any artifacts that might help us to tell exactly where Ponce de Leon landed some 500 years ago. However, in the centuries since my time here in Florida, some amazing discoveries have been made that help to shed light on what life was like here in colonial Spanish Florida. For example, back in 1559, Don Tristan de Luna attempted to settle the first Spanish colony at Pensacola. The colony was eventually wiped out by a hurricane. But it wasn't until just recently that underwater archaeologists using scuba gear, I believe is what you call it, yes, scuba gear, discovered 2 of de Luna's ships. And in St. Augustine, the nation's oldest European settlement. A number of ongoing excavations helped to reveal buildings and artifacts that, again, helped to shed light on what life was like here in Spanish Florida. But I have to reiterate that no archaeology up to this point conducted in Florida has revealed anything that might tell us exactly where Ponce de Leon landed 500 years ago. Now, it is my hope that this will change, hopefully in the near future. But until that time, I must admit that I can be of no further assistance to the court, and I do apologize.
No need for apology, Mr. Moore. We appreciate your testimony here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, our next witness was among the first native Floridians to have contact with Ponce de Leon during his first voyage here in 1513. Perhaps she can shed some light on where he first landed. Bailiff, please call the next witness.
This hearing of the Florida Historical Society calls the Ice Queen to the stand.
Welcome, Your Majesty. Thank you for being here. Please tell us about your encounter with Juan Ponce de Leon and its impact on your people.
When Juan Ponce de Leon discovered Florida, my people and many others had been living here for more than 10,000 years. We had complex societies, elaborate systems of trade, and our own ancient religions. Our villages throughout this land had large ceremonial centers surrounded by buildings built on shell middens and council houses made of wood and thatch that could hold more than 1,000 people. La Florida. Over a dozen tribes with all distinctive cultures. While many of the tribes were sophisticated hunters and fishermen, our Appalachian brothers and sisters in the Panhandle were accomplished farmers. They grew corn, beans, pumpkins, and other crops. The Appalachian food storage system was so effective that when the Spanish eventually arrived in that region, they found enough food for hundreds of people and their horses for many months. The Timucua people in the north formed a confederation of more than 40 powerful chiefdoms. Their territory stretched from the east coast of North Florida far down into central Florida. When Ponce de Leon first set foot on this land, 200,000 Timucua alone lived here. They had the Bear Clan, the Quail Clan, and the White Deer Clan, and many others. The children belonged to their mother's clan and had to marry outside their own clan, which united the society and promoted peace. In southwest Florida, in what you call Mound Key, the Calusa Indians had a powerful chief who demanded great tribute from the chiefs of all the villages in the region. The Calusa built a canal system on the island with temples and other important buildings. And like many of the people of the land, they relied heavily on fish and shellfish for their existence, but developed a trade system with the inland people. Oh, the Calusa were a creative people, making colorful masks for use in their religious ceremonies and carving unique works of art. These are just a few of the vibrant, flourishing societies that existed when Ponce de Leon first arrived. My people, the Ais, were the ones he first encountered. At that time, our northernmost villages were north of what you call Titusville. And my people lived down the east coast all the way into what is known today as Martin County. The day I saw those 3 Spanish ships, I knew our lives had changed forever. I rejoiced when the current swept the smallest ship away, and I hoped the others would follow. When the small group came ashore, we gave those men a greeting that let them know they were not welcome here. But that did not stop the Spanish, though. For the next century and beyond, they worked hard to change our culture by making us abandon our ancient religion and adopt theirs. They enslaved and killed us by the thousands. Finally, the unfamiliar diseases they brought to us proved too much for our medicine men to fight. The great native societies of Florida collapsed. And the people disappeared. Those last remaining were absorbed into other Native American groups, such as the Seminoles, who arrived in Florida from the north in the 1700s. When Juan Ponce de Leon first came here in 1513, it was the end of my people's existence.
We're very sorry for your loss. Can you tell us anything about where Ponce de Leon first landed before he encountered your people?
All I can tell you is when he first landed, he landed north of where he first encountered my people. Even if you could describe the area where he landed, who could find it today? You have altered the landscape of this land to the point where it is unrecognizable to me. You have changed the course of great rivers, chopped down expansive forests, and constructed one building after another along the shoreline. If you continue in this path, you will no longer be able to call this the land of flowers.
Thank you for your testimony today. Bailiff, please call our final witness.
This hearing of the Florida Historical Society calls Juan Ponce de Leon to the stand.
Welcome, Governor. Thank you for joining us. If anyone can tell us where you came ashore and named our state in 1513, we're hoping it's you.
We shall see. First, I would like to say that I am honored that after making my first voyage to this land in 1513, that you would even remember it 500 years later. I am proud as well as humbled. Now, my situation, I came here to the New World in 1493 on the second voyage of Christopher Columbus. I was a boy of 19, but I have served in the wars in the peninsula that you know as Spain. When we came here, we were young. We came here for opportunity, for glory, for honor, for wealth, and for God. In 1504, there was a rebellion because of poor leadership among the Taino Indians of Hispaniola. I was a captain at that point and was sent to quell the resistance. I was successful. Because of this, I was made the provincial governor of the eastern part of the island. I was able to take this position as provincial governor, start my own ranch, was married, started to have children. I raised cassava, bread, and water, which I sold to the ships headed back to Spain, and I became very wealthy. But there was always more. We heard of an island to the east that was lush and green, and more importantly, had gold lying in the streams. So I received license to go and explore this island and claim it for Spain. You know today as Puerto Rico. I was the first governor. Again, I was very successful there. But the son of Christopher Columbus, Diego, he won a court case against my king, Fernando, and unfortunately, he gained control of the island. It was not big enough for the two of us, and he made another man the governor, and I was forced out. But Fernando favored me, and so I was given license to explore lands to the northeast that we referred to as Bimini. I was to claim these lands for Spain and make them our own. We left on March 3rd, 1513. By April 2nd, we sighted the east coast. This peninsula that I named La Florida because it happened on the feast day of Pascua de la Resurrección, which we called as a nickname Pascua La Florida because of all the flowers. The name suited. We came around and down the east coast, the Los Martires, the Martyrs, islands that I thought looked like suffering men, were named at that time. We went up the Gulf Coast, returned. We named the Tortugas at that time, name that it still holds. At that time, I sent Anton de Alominos, the best navigator in the Indies fleet, to do some more exploring while I returned to Puerto Rico. I arrived back in October of 1513. I had been gone for 8 months. Now, as to the question of where exactly we landed, this is not completely good. I've heard your arguments. Most of them wouldn't hold enough water to strain lettuce. A lot has changed. If you took me to the same spot, I wouldn't recognize it. I'll say this. We did not conquer the world by being stupid or lost. We knew where we were and where we have been. It is up to you to decide whether you agree.
Thank you, Governor, for your testimony. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the issue as to where exactly Juan Ponce de Leon landed when he named our state on April 2nd, 1513, and where he first went ashore the next day is now in your hands. Please consider carefully all of the information that has been presented to you. The bailiff will show you now to the deliberation room. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, please remain seated while the jury deliberates. To entertain you during this period, we brought in Florida singer and songwriter Chris Call.
In the year of our Lord, 1513, Easter Sunday, Feast of the Flowers, at the helm of San Cristobal, Juan Ponce de Leon, land in our sight, now we sail to our fate. St. John's River, lead us to the fountain of youth. As we search for gold, we search for truth. Glory to Spain, our flag in the sand. We claim this soil for King Ferdinand. Strange eyes upon us are like daggers across the bay. But God is with us on this Easter Sunday. St. John's River, lead us to the fountain of youth. As we search for gold, we search for truth. Discovered new land, Easter Sunday. Put our flag in the sand, Easter Sunday. Pasqua Florida, Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Call. I'm a musician and singer-songwriter, and I've written a collection of songs about our great state's history, including that last one, talking about Ponce de Leon and some of the legends surrounding his first voyage here. And the next song I'm going to sing for you is called Native Land, and this is about the Native American Indians of our state and some of the struggles that they've had throughout their time here, including the Seminole Indians. And after the Seminole Indian Wars, when many were relocated and forced to walk the Trail of Tears to reservations in places like Oklahoma, and were forced to leave their native land.
white man couldn't match his gun, hiding out in the swampland, nowhere left to run. All the way to Oklahoma, the tears fill my hands as I say goodbye to my native land. For years we lived in harmony, built the Turtle Mound, all the tribes together, now we're Seminole bound. We're down with Lakuchi, Osceola spirit led, Tiger Tail and Bow Legs, never forget the dead. Well, all the way to Oklahoma, the tears fill my hands as I say goodbye to my native land. Well, all the way to Oklahoma, I make my final stand as I say goodbye to my native land. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to perform one more song for you before the jury comes back out. And this song is called Florida, You'll Always Be My Home. This song is very special to me because I do a lot of teaching in our school systems all around our state, teaching kids about Florida history through music. And one of the highlights of my career doing that was a few years ago when I worked with a school in my home county of Brevard County, and I worked with a 4th grade class there, and we put on a play about Florida history. And we had dramatic reenactments, lots of history and about all things throughout our state's history, and of course music. And the highlight of the show for me was I got to perform this song that I wrote, and I had about 100 10-year-olds singing it with me, a 4th grade class at Stevenson Elementary. So it was a real highlight, and I'm going to close with this song for you now called Florida, You'll Always Be My Home. Shines forever as far as my eyes can see. Birds touch the sky as they spread their great wings. The beauty of this land, it unfolds before me. It's a smile on my face that makes me want to
hearing of the Florida Historical Society is back in session. Executive Director Ben Brotemarkle presiding.
Please be seated. Thank you, Chris Call, for that performance. The time has come to hear our verdict. Foreman of the jury, this special hearing of the Florida Historical Society has been called to determine where exactly Ponce de Leon landed when he named our state in 1513. Do we have a decision?
Your Honor, the jury is hopelessly deadlocked and unable to reach a verdict.
Let's have order, please. The jury has spoken, and we thank them for their service. Although we have not been able to make a determination today as to where Ponce de Leon first landed in 1513, the debate over this point can continue long after today's proceeding. As we commemorate the 500th anniversary of the naming of our state and other upcoming milestones of Spanish colonization in Florida, we must also contemplate the fact that Ponce's first contact with the native population set in motion a process that would destroy the lives of people who had lived here for thousands of years. These people had developed sophisticated cultures that would not survive the continued European contact to follow. When Ponce came to Florida 500 years ago, it changed the course of world history. Not only did he give this land the same name we use for it today, Ponce's discovery of the Gulf Stream would lead to the first European colonization of what would become the United States, long before Jamestown was established and long before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. What we have demonstrated here today is that the history of America begins in Florida. This hearing is adjourned.